All right, so today we're going to talk about web components in real life. Well, sort of. I mean, it's not like a real app that I'm building for my day job, but it's a real app and it works. And it's a lot of fun, so that's what we're going to go with. So the origin of this, basically, I like going to do karaoke from time to time. And I was always curious, like, what is the deal with the terrible graphics of lyrics that scroll across on all these characters? Like, how does that even work? How did that become a thing? So I wanted to find out, and I was curious. And so, as it turns out, that is the CD plus graphics format. And what they figured out is that on audio CDs, there's a little track of information that's not really used to play audio. And they figured out that they could come up with a format where they could squeeze 4-bit graphics into that little tiny space and like just record it along with a normal CD. So it plays like an audio CD, but if you're using the special like a CD plus G player, it recognizes that little track and renders graphics for it. So of course my next question after I'm like, okay, so that's how it works is, can you do this with HTML5? Because of course. And as it turns out, you can. I found an HTML5 CDG player that was like I learned more about the CDG format than I ever care to, but I don't have to know it anymore because I abstracted it into a little library. But basically, someone had taken they had an open source, I think it was C or C++ CDG parsing library, and they had done a very rough port to JavaScript and HTML. So it's JavaScript that was written by a C programmer, and you can tell, but it worked. And so basically, I took that and I twiddled around with it because I like custom elements, and I turned it into a CDG-player custom element. And then once I did that, I'm like, okay, well now I built this little element. Like, what am I going to do with it? I don't want to just. I have no use for this. I've built it for no purpose. So a little bit of time went on, and I started building a little karaoke app. And it started with just 4 hours on a Sunday. I was bored, and I started working on this, and I've just sort of been pitching in here and there in the past few months. And so that became Songroom. So Songroom is a web karaoke player where one device is the screen on which the karaoke plays, and then other people can connect to that same session with their phones. And so all of the queuing and playlists and stuff like that you do with karaoke, rather than like punching it into a terrible dirty keypad, instead you have just your smartphone, everything's right there. So I thought this is a nice advancement on karaoke technology, and I wanted a chance to play with Polymer and do more stuff with it, and it works. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is a little demo. Songroom.
Did you write native apps, or is it just a web?
Just web.
For the phone?
Yep. So
you didn't use Cordova or anything?
Nope. So this is all web, baby. So let's have a playback screen here. Oh, I gotta remember what the code is. It was no. All right, hang on. I'm gonna have to look this up real quick.
Can we join your room?
You will be able to. That's the expected outcome of the demo, but I've forgotten the damn key for the room because I said I had to do a little bit of special setup for it. But here we go. Oh, of course. One moment. I think I can. We'll figure this out anyway. Hang on, because I don't think I have very good read permissions set on this yet. You know what? I'll just make. Well, if I make a new room, I know what I can do. I'm sorry. This is just a moment of delay. I swore that I would remember it's just 4 letters long, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll remember that, no sweat.
Is it A, B, C, D?
It is UMW. Here we go. We. So join that. So anyone who wants to can get out their phone and go to songroom.tv and then enter the code UMWE. And actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this out of full screen for a moment. And I'm going to open a second window so that we can sort of see both on the screen here. All right. so performer controls. Join the room. All right, so here we have our karaoke app, and over here we have all the songs for it. And let's find something here to play. Let me know if something jumps out at you. Here, we'll go with the Supremes. So here I'll hit play. Whoop. Whoop.
We all played at the same time.
Oh, are other people? Oh, are other people on the playback screen?
I'm on the playback screen.
Yeah, so don't do that because I think that doesn't work right.
Okay,
If there's multiple playback screens, I think that's causing trouble right now.
So how do you...
It's the other URL, songrooms.tv.
Well, yeah, so when you go to songroom.tv, just go to performer controls, not playback screen.
Gotcha.
And sorry, I should have been more clear about that, especially when it's brittle. All right, here we go. We'll listen to some U2. Oh, there's ABC by Jackson 5. That's nice. Uh-oh. I think my cue got out of whack here. We can fix it. All right, well, I think I managed to break this completely, and now maybe we won't have a demo. So, but you can see things are coming on to the playlist. Wait, we can fix this. We have the technology.
It wouldn't be a live demo if we
Right?
I can't do anything on a Mac, is what I'm finding out. There we go. So now we have karaoke playing. Oh, it's playing out of that. Interesting. Who knew? So you can skip songs, and that'll say who it was that skipped the song. You can browse and add new songs. So it's a little karaoke app, and there's a lot that I'd like to add to it, but it does work, which is cool. But what I want to talk about today is how I built it, how this is all put together, and how you generally do things with Polymer.
This is crazy. Where'd you source the music from?
I had a collection that I did. I'll talk about that in a minute too.
Is this your dark past?
Yeah. Well, this is. Yeah. We'll just say I acquired it, and it's something that I have.
You're a closet KJ.
All right. Exit full screen. I cannot.
He is
get...
pretty good at karaoke, though.
Oh, yeah?
No joke.
All right. So back to this. Here we go.
Oh, yeah. That's the Quince beers.
All right. So we did the demo, and okay. So the song catalog. Basically, I had a bunch of MP3 plus G files, which is, now that we don't have CDs anymore, like CDG doesn't really make sense. So instead, there's just an MP3 file and then a .cdg file that has that little 4-bit video track. I uploaded a bunch of songs to S3. Then I wrote a little Ruby script that went through those, searched the Echo Nest API to sort of try to match up track and artist info, and then stuck all that into Firebase so that I could use this. Yeah, and I have plans for sort of how to do things less manually in the future. But the tools and the services that are used to build this app, first of all, is Yeoman Polymer, which we covered in one of our earlier meetups, and all of our meetups are recorded and on YouTube, so there will be a link to this. If you want to know more about Yeoman Polymer, you can watch that video. We're also using Firebase, and we had a great session that Jake led mostly on building real-time apps with Polymer and Firebase. Check that out as well. And then DivShot is how this is hosted. So there's no custom server code running at all. This is just Firebase and a browser, and some scripts that I wrote that don't run all the time, but just ran the once. So let's take a look at the controller interface, and let's do a little bit of anatomy on it. So the setup that has this title bar and then stuff below it, and then when you scroll the stuff below it, doesn't scroll with the title bar. That's a core element called core header panel that basically lets you say, here's a top thing and here's a content window, and I want to scroll the content window but not the top thing. These tabs that let... Yes, it is open source. It is on GitHub. It's linked in here, but it's github.com/webcomponents-la/Songroom.
If you have your laptop, you can do an inspect on it too.
Yeah, that's true. And so then we have paper tabs, which is the queue and browse here. So that's some of the paper elements, the material design stuff. So if I should have kept that up. Do I still have it? I don't think I do. But when you tap between the two windows, you have a nice ripple effect. And then you have core animated pages that's applied here on this container. And that's what has a nice sliding animation between the queue and the browse. So that's also built just using a built-in Polymer element. Then core list, which I sort of talked about a little bit earlier, which is a more or less infinite scrollable list. And basically how it works is that around the viewable area of your screen, it creates a buffer of things that it's rendering after the screen and things that it's rendering before the screen. And it's a limited number of elements. So if you have a list with 6,000 items, it's maybe only rendering 20 or 30 of them at a time. And as you scroll, it's dynamically rendering new ones and sticking it on the bottom or putting them on the top if you're going up. And what that does is that saves on how much DOM the browser is having to render and think about at a given time. So it makes it a lot more performant, especially on mobile devices. And then other than that, there's core icons sprinkled all around here, which is just a set of icons that are available and you can just include easily with a little tag. So that's sort of the layout anatomy without getting into any of the sort of mechanics of it. And to talk about sort of how it works, basically there are the two different pages are controlled by two sort of master elements. One is called Songroom Controller, one is called Songroom Player. What Songroom Controller does when you first access it and you see the you see the queue and all of that, it has done an anonymous authentication to Firebase. So it's basically set a cookie so that it'll remember if you refresh and you'll have the same data. Then it's pulling that queue and song data information from Firebase based on URLs that are relative to the room. So it looks at the room code, finds that in Firebase, finds related info, all the people. The playback and message display are also synced through Firebase. So there's basically just a little playback object in Firebase, and if I'm in the controller and I want it to pause, I just set pause to true. And then in the player, it recognizes, oh, hey, pause was just set to true, and so it pauses the media. So that's all like kept perfectly in sync without really having to think about it. And that's also the reason that having multiple player windows was sort of screwing with things, because you have multiple things registering the same event and then acting on it, so it was sort of running over each other. But we can fix that with time.
For you to put your login information on, does that mean I have to go into your actual JavaScript file, or where would you keep that information?
So the login information, like if I logged in with Facebook instead of anonymously, or
well, no, like the Firebase login, that thing.
Oh,
it says like global's user, but I don't know how to.
Yeah. So basically, and we'll go. So here, actually, let me open that up right now. We're going to do the smaller full screen here. So basically, there's a library that actually was built by Adi Osmani at Google called Firebase Element. That is a web components way to connect to Firebase. And that has two elements in it, Firebase Element and Firebase Login. So how Firebase Login works, which is what you were just talking about, is basically you create a Firebase Login element that has your Firebase URL in it. It has the provider you want to use, so that could be anonymous or Facebook or GitHub or whatever you've set up in Firebase. And then like you trigger a login, and as soon as you're logged in, it just automatically populates this user object, that you can then do whatever you want. So user is just a property of this element that you can like grab at any time or listen to events for or whatever. So what the app is doing is it's logging you in anonymously, then it's taking that user information and persisting it to a globals object that's an element that I built that basically just lets you have a singleton. So anywhere that you put this PVC globals element, you will have access to the same data, and it only keeps one copy of it, so it's not like copying it for each time you have a new element. So that's Firebase login, and then Firebase Element is basically saying, I want to take a specific location in Firebase, and I just want to get that as an object and have that be basically interactive. So how it works is you can point this. Who has never worked with Firebase before? Because I should probably do, yeah, that's a lot of people. So backtrack a moment. Firebase is, well, great for one. Firebase is a real-time data store. And basically how it works is you can connect to it using JavaScript primarily. They also have iOS and Android SDKs. They also have a REST API. But JavaScript is the way that we're doing it, obviously. And basically you can think of it as a giant JSON document that updates in real time and that you can listen for events for at any location. So it's all structured, in a very URL-esque way. So I have, my Firebase domain /users/ user ID, and then that's going to have user information. And of course, that sounds terribly insecure because you're in the browser, so people can just change that around. So Firebase also has a set of security rules where you can set permissions on who can read, who can write based on authentication or other information in the database. So basically, this is a, yeah.
How would you describe it as different than a database?
It's different than a database because if you're connected to this from 10 different places and data changes, that is instantly synced across all of those places simultaneously without you having to do any additional work. So it basically is it's a database taken real time. So rather than having something where, I'm going to push some data here and then I'm going to set up a subscriber to make sure that I hear a response and handling all that manually, instead it's basically just Firebase pings an event that says, hey, this value updated. Hey, there was a new child added at this location. So it's really powerful and it works great with Polymer, and so it's just sort of a natural fit. And you can use it as a full backend as a service. So Static Showdown, which we talked about just wrapping up, this entire application is just also run by Firebase. So all of, we had a live page here. So this is not really getting any activity on the, basically we had this running during the competition and let people post GIFs of how they were feeling at the moment. And this also had a live stream of commits and deploys as people were in the competition. And so because Firebase works how it does, and especially how it works with Polymer, you can set up basically, and this is actually we can do a little bit of inspecting here and see what that's all about.
And one thing you might have to wrap your head around is that typically, with other frameworks, you'd have to initialize and connect to Firebase with a couple, a snippet of JavaScript. With web components, all you do is call an element, and it automatically sets up the connection for you, and then auto binds it to a data variable.
Most of the times you have to have some separate authorization plugin or something that you have to configure, and that was the thing that kind of threw me off.
Yeah, with this you just import an HTML file and then call the element.
Even with the Firebase JavaScript API, you literally just say new Firebase.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, yeah. Firebase has a really simple API. If you're using it, it's just man, it is amazing how much this does given how simple it is.
It feels like a native JavaScript API.
Yeah, definitely. So right here, I have a little, I have something called app list. And basically this is just a tiny wrapper that extends Firebase list. And so I'm saying at path events, I want to store this as data events. I want to order by priority, which in this case is a timestamp that I'm storing. And I only want to show the last 30. And what that means is when a new entry is posted, this data is automatically going to be updated in this element without me doing any work. If there's more than 30 entries, the last one is automatically going to be removed without me doing any work. It all just synchronizes in real time and sort of just happens. And that's really nice to work with. So that's Firebase. Firebase Element is working with an object style of data. So you set it, let's say you have a user and you have profile information like name and Twitter and all of that. You'd create a Firebase element that pointed to your Firebase /user/ID. And then if you bound something in Polymer to the data attribute, and then you change that object, not even like ran a special method or anything, you just change the data in that attribute, that's automatically synchronized back to Firebase. So you're literally just changing an object in your local JavaScript, and then that's persisted to a server and then synchronized out to anyone else who's looking at the same data. So it's a really powerful paradigm once you get used to it.
How would this Firebase syntax play with like handlebars and other type?
I mean, like if you're like, in this case, we're using it with Polymer, and so we're using all of the Polymer templating stuff that comes with that. But I mean, it works absolutely fine. There's just a little bit more synchronization involved if you're doing it with pure JavaScript. Basically, you're listening to events, and then like whatever your data object is that's being rendered out to handlebars is like you just update that and then re-trigger a render or whatever your framework has you do. So I mean, Firebase will play nice with anything, but I think it plays particularly nicely with web components because of the way it just sort of natively observes those objects, and you don't have to call methods. You just literally change an object and it's changed in the database. So Firebase Element and Firebase Login are the two official elements right now. And then recently I submitted a pull request because I built this for the Static Showdown basically because we needed it for the page of Firebase List. So even if you store an array in Firebase, it treats that like an object. So it's not like an ordered list. Instead, it's an object with keys 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And so like it can be a little bit challenging to work with list-like data in Firebase if you've never done it before. But Firebase List sort of abstracts and wraps that and takes it all away. So this does turn any location that has that list-like data into an array, and if you change any of the individual elements or any of the individual children of that array, that's automatically synced back the same way as it is with Firebase Element. So hopefully this will become a part of Firebase Element very soon. If not, I'll just publish it separately on Bower, and that'll be fine too.
That means that like it understands like the array like methods and stuff.
Yeah, so basically, and since I wrote this, I can actually speak to it. What happens is it listens for Firebase sends out a series of events. So it'll send child added, child changed, child moved, or child removed. And so I listen to all of those operations, and then I basically perform the minimal number of array splices that's needed to move the data around to the now proper place. And then I make sure that all of the object observers are still up and running and everything like that. And so like you don't do anything, and it doesn't like rewrite the entire array structure. It just moves things around according to those events. So it's doing as little as possible to give you as much functionality as possible. So that's a good overview of Firebase. And like that, I mean, that's a lot of the magic behind all this work, of how all of this works. So you see, somebody pauses playback and then it pops up a little notification. Once you understand the idea that you can just bind to these elements and it just changes and you don't have to even worry about synchronizing it, you can see how that stuff becomes not only possible, but pretty simple to do. All right, and then Songroom Player is the player. That also uses Firebase Element. It uses Paper Toast, which is a little material design notification thing that just pops up a little notification. So that plus a little custom styling gave me those little bottom bars that were popping up. And I mean, that's pretty much it. So I want to actually go into the code now because I think that that's going to be sort of helpful to walk through. Is there something that is there an action or something that you particularly like to walk through that would help you sort of understand and hook into this? So maybe first I'll talk about the application structure. So here I have my Songroom folder. And this was all bootstrapped using Yeoman Polymer. So basically all you have to do for that is, here, I'll do it right now. Make dir test app. So you just say yo Polymer. And sure, core elements, sure, paper elements. Like I said, we have a whole video about this from an earlier one. I'm just showing you this real quick to show you how quickly it happens. So you just hit enter a few times. It Bower installs all the stuff that you wanted and needed. And then you have an application skeleton, and you can just run grunt serve and start working. So I've done that here a while back. And so the way it's structured is you have the app folder, which is sort of your HTML root and where all the work takes place. I have the dist folder, which is where the build process puts a minified version of everything. So you're probably used to things like Uglify or CSSmin or the various tools for compressing JavaScript and CSS. The Polymer team released a similar thing for web components called Vulcanize. And what Vulcanize does is it looks at the HTML in your document, finds all of the link import statements, which is how you import new elements and start using them and stuff like that. And it concatenates all of those together, minifies the JavaScript it finds inside of them, and then puts them all into one big file. So it's basically gives you all the same benefits. Now you only have one request instead of 20, but it works for web components instead of your standard JavaScript concatenation. So it's very nice that that tool already exists. Maybe someday when HTTP2 is the standard and everyone's using it, we won't need that anymore, but for now it's very helpful. And this is just going to run forever. Okay, so dist is where the build goes. Other than that, I mean, that's pretty much it. So all of the work happens in app. And so I have Bower components, and that's where all of the dependencies for my application go, the external elements that I've installed. And then I have elements, and this is where all of the elements for the app itself go. So for the entire app that you saw, I've only created, looks like maybe 10 or 12 different elements, and like that implements all of the functionality that you see. So let's start at the beginning. Let's look at index.html. So you go to index.html, pretty standard HTML page. Here's where the build process hooks in and says, instead of importing this file, I'm going to import the vulcanized file that I built instead. And then here you see just Songroom app as an element by itself, and then that's all that there is in the index.html. So as you're building things with Polymer, you'll find that you're probably going to end up doing something like this, where basically everything ends up being bootstrapped into sort of a master element that just goes like at the top of the HTML body, and then that's the only thing in the HTML body. There are some reasons that I don't totally love this and hope that like a better paradigm emerges, because I don't like the idea of the entire app being in the shadow DOM basically. But this is sort of the standard way that you're going to work with things today. And I mean, it works out fine. Like the browser handles it and everything works. Yeah.
Do you think it would be cooler if instead of things being nested, like everything was sort of peer level with each other, and then you reference like what was inside something else?
Yeah, and so that's really, yeah, so like that's what I'd really like to see, because when you have the idea of the light DOM and the shadow DOM, I really start thinking of the light DOM as being like the public API and the shadow DOM as being like the private API. So I would love to see more sort of work and exploration around the lines of like, how can we have light DOM communicate with each other better so that we don't have to use shadow DOM all the time? Because the reason that you drop into shadow DOM is because Polymer has really nice templating and like expressions and stuff built into it that you can use, but you can only use once you drop into the shadow DOM. So like I'd love to see a way to make that a little easier to do and like a little easier to pass data back and forth at the light DOM level. But like honestly, like it'll feel a little weird at first, and then you'll get used to it and everything will just seem normal.
Well,
so
you talked earlier about how the web browser is no longer a document, it's an app.
Yeah.
And it bothers me, I've been doing this for 12 years, it bothers me that things are still written as if it's a document, and nesting is like a document model. It's like, I really don't like the DOM at all.
Well, you might not like web components if you don't like the DOM.
I deal with it. But,
yeah. See, what I think really works is like the reason that I think it still works to have the DOM, even though you're describing applications, is that like the nice thing about that nested structure is that it really gives you like control and understanding of composing different things together. So you have the idea of like a parent and children and siblings and all of these relationships that you can take advantage of in various ways with varying components. So, and the idea of event bubbling and the ability to catch an event at any point up the chain and handle it there. Like when you're building an application with these sort of presets built in, you can do some really powerful things. Like the app router, which I'm actually not using in this because I started doing this before I was aware of it really, is an HTML5 router built with Polymer. And how that works is you just have this app router element, and then the children of that are the various routes that you want to declare. And so like you can see how like the nesting and the parent-child relationship makes sense there, because it's like I'm declaring a router, and now I'm declaring the routes inside that router. And then you can like further nest and have a template inside an app route and say like, this is what I want to render when this route triggers. And so like it is something that you have to get used to, because we're all used to basically having this like simulated JavaScript world that represents the page without actually thinking about the page itself. And so it does take some getting used to, and it might like, you know, eventually it'll sort of click, and I mean, or maybe it won't. But for me, like, I started working with this, and once I realized like this is all just like the native browser stuff, so I can bubble an event, and whether it's a native app or a native element or a custom element that's bubbling that event doesn't matter.
So what's the problem then when having a container element? Like what
so
do you disagree with?
The only thing that I don't really like is that, so like if I look at Songroom app, like this is a lot more descriptive of the content of my application. So this shows you a lot more of what my application's actually, oh, I am using App Router. I forgot all about that. So like inside my Songroom app, and so how you declare a Polymer element, if you haven't done it before, is you have just an element called Polymer-element. You give the element a name. The name has to have a dash in it. You declare attributes. You can declare some default events and other things at the top level. And then you have a template tag. And so everything inside the template tag, that's your shadow DOM. So that's what's going to be like rendered out and stamped out as your shadow DOM. And then you have a script tag below that, which is where you define all the behavior for the element. So like what's really nice about this is that this encapsulates everything about your element in one place. So it's not like you have like your JavaScript behavior over here, and then your HTML for that element over there, and then your CSS somewhere else.
You usually get it in a zip file, and you have to pepper them and hope.
Yeah, it's like, you know, and they all have weird relative paths to each other. Instead, this is just like a single file with all of its dependencies declared at the top. And so it's basically like pretending as if HTML is your program, like HTML is your programming environment, not just JavaScript. It's like taking the entire process up a level, which I really like, but is a little weird and takes some getting used to.
Why do you have to put a dash for the element?
So that was just a really, so the question was, why do you have to put a dash? That was a really pragmatic and I think clever solution. None of the native elements have dashes in their name. So if you require that all custom elements have a dash, then now you have a way to tell the difference between native and custom elements, and you're not going to accidentally try to define something that's already defined. So, yeah.
Does anything weird happen if you like, you know, if both two things have are dependent on like underscore or something like that?
So like,
Or twice?
oh, so basically, Linkrel, like if you have a Linkrel import, that is only going to import the specific URL once. So if you provide the same URL to it 100 times, it's only going to import it the first time. The caveat being that it has to resolve to the same URL. So I mean, it can be relative on the same domain, and that'll all work out okay. But if you have like, if here I depend on Polymer locally installed by Bower, and then another element depends on it installed on a CDN somewhere with a different URL, that is going to load twice and clash and probably blow up, which is the main reason that I say for now you have to use Bower if you're going to build things with web components and Polymer. I think that they're working on like how do we have a standardized solution to that problem, because it does need to be solved. But for now, it's just use Bower so that you're like referencing everything in the same place.
Files can probably have like a hash that's included in the top of them.
Yeah, like I mean, you could have something like, you know, rel import like imports and then say Polymer or Polymer element or something like that. And so that's saying like, you know, if I ever have another thing that says imports Polymer element, don't import that because I've already done so. And there's different ways that you could solve it, but it's not solved yet.
Good question.
Yeah.
Are you kind of just avoiding using the content tag inside the templates for now?
You know, I'm not avoiding it, but I don't end up doing it very often. And I don't really have a reason as to why. It's just that I guess mostly I've been working, like most of the work that I'm doing is like binding to data or doing other things that's less about like straight DOM manipulation. I mean, I think that there are really cool uses for that, so I'm not avoiding it specifically. I just haven't found a great use for it in what I've been building.
Yeah, I've just noticed, I don't know if it's, I don't completely understand how it works, but I've noticed some weird quirks with how the light DOM and the shadow DOM get combined.
Yeah.
They talk about the compiled tree, but you don't really see that when you're inspecting the DOM yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I mean, content tags, like, it's a really powerful concept. So basically what he's talking about is here, is it contents with plural? I think it is.
No, it's just content.
It's just content.
And
So if I put content here inside my shadow DOM, that's basically saying all of the light DOM children of this element I want to insert right here. So if I wanted to have like a custom element whose only purpose was to make text red inside of it, I could just have like, or that's a bad example, but if I wanted to just like wrap it in a div that I gave some styles to, I could have like div ID equals red, and then like have the content there, and then inside my shadow DOM define red color red, and then like basically I'd use that custom element and all of the text in those light DOM nodes would turn red. Although I think, and this might be running into it right here, like I might need no, that would work, I think. But anyway, so like that's the purpose of content, is to be able to like shape and manipulate the light DOM in more of a like display layout type way.
I was working on an element that was basically like a card that would flip over.
Yeah.
And so there was a front and a back to the card. So I had two different content insertion spots. But I was noticing a weird thing where the div wrapper I was using inside to apply the transitions to wasn't overflowing over the light DOM properly. And it was like the light DOM was existing outside of the content node within the shadow node.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm guessing there's still some dragons there, and hopefully that'll all get, so I actually did think of a pretty straightforward, so this core header panel right here, this is one of the core elements that Google provides, and here I have a title bar, like I have this first div that's a title bar, and then I have a second div that says class content. I believe how the core header panel works is it doesn't care what these are, but it uses the content. It uses the content tag because the other thing you can do is content selector. Select, and then you can put a CSS selector here. And so that's basically saying, let's say I did first child. That's basically saying, like, I only want to insert the first child of this from the light DOM here.
Like,
and
so the first DOM element of that light DOM?
So it's a CSS selector. So I could say, like, I want to insert like an H1 or whatever.
So
like
a direct, like if it was a like Angular directed, it would be like a transclude.
Yeah, it's similar to transclude.
Yeah. So yeah. So basically, like how the core header panel works is it's got its own structure, and then it like takes the light DOM elements from my structure and inserts them into that, so that I have this nice scrolling panel. So there's definitely reasons to use content. It's just that most of the core elements have done most of the reasons that I'd want to use content already, so I haven't had much of a chance to use it. Yeah, so let's keep going. All right, so here we have Firebase login. I talked about that already. PVC globals, I talked about that as well. That's a little element I wrote that just stores like a single global object that you can write to and use anywhere. So anywhere I put PVC globals and bind to the values, that's the same object that I'm accessing, which comes in useful because you can't just share data across Shadow DOM boundaries by default. And so when you have things that you want to store that are sort of application-wide, like what's my user ID, stuff like that, I just stick that into a globals.
Is that like JavaScript, like view variables?
It'd be sort of like defining things at like the very top level scope in Angular and things like that, like where, except for you have to manually like retrieve it at each point here because like that data isn't just available by default.
Does it update if you change something in the global variables?
Yeah, so if you change it one place, it's automatically reflected everywhere else that it's using, and it also fires events based on that. So like you could like if there was something specific you wanted to trigger when a global changed, you could do that. You can even bind, like I could bind a Firebase, like I could bind Firebase data into the globals, which when I changed in the globals would actually propagate back out and change the Firebase. So like the observation functions that are built into, like that are sort of the standard way that a lot of these elements are being built, really let you do, like, you don't think about doing complicated things, but sort of complicated things are happening behind the scenes.
Is that like a suggested design pattern, or something you kind of just came up with?
The globals thing is sort of just what I came up with, because I was building apps and I was like, I really need access to like the same data like in these 3 different elements, and there's like there are different ways to pass that and different ways to do this, and this is just the one that I landed on that was really easy to do and made sense.
There's an article too on the Polymer website that talks all about element-to-element communication.
Yeah,
and that's what we're doing, making your custom element, passing data into that.
Another way that you can do it is there is a core signals element, and this basically lets you do like pub sub between any elements in your, so you can have like a core signals here, and then you like trigger an event on it, and then if any other like core signals element is listening for that event, it'll immediately fire that. So that'll let you do sort of, you know, tossing messages between different elements pretty easily. So there's basically the best practices for building Polymer apps don't exist yet. Like it's still very much being figured out. And like I'll come back and like, you know, I started this maybe 3 months ago, and like I've come back a couple times and looked at stuff and been like, man, that was a really terrible way to design that, just because I've had 3 more months of like building stuff with Polymer. So it's still very early days, but like in a lot of ways that's exciting, because you can sort of discover those new patterns and like find what works for you. Yeah.
I think if you scroll down, there was something. Yeah, I was looking at this earlier. The logged in, where it has the new Firebase. I like just got introduced to Firebase a little bit, and I used the Firebase element, but I didn't use anything like this where I called new Firebase. Like, can you just explain?
Let me try to remember what this is doing, because I wrote this a while back. So what we're doing is, I assume that's binding to on login, logged in. Yeah. So when Firebase like triggers, like says, hey, there's a user that just logged in, this method gets fired. And what it's doing,
you just want to use Firebase out the element.
Oh, that's what it's doing. Okay, so this is actually a solution for a problem that I can kind of get around better now that I'm looking at it. But basically, one of the really weird caveats of Firebase Element is that it can, like, if you set it to a location that doesn't have any data, then the value is null. And the problem is sort of an initialization synchronizing problem. So if you had a Firebase element and you initialized it to an empty object, and you happen to, like, you're like, oh, if this is null, then initialize it to an empty object because I'm going to use it like an object. But if you happen to do that before the data was bound and the data comes later, what you've actually done is you've set that location to an empty object. So you've wiped out everything at that location by setting that to an empty object. And now there was already a data ready like variable that you could check that I didn't know about when I wrote this, but now I actually had a pull request accepted to Firebase Element that has a data ready event, so you can listen for that event and then say, okay, I know now for sure whether or not this has any data here, so I can initialize it with my default stuff if it doesn't. So
that's exactly the problem I ran into.
Yeah, so how I do that here, actually I'll do some live refactoring. That's cool. So now instead of this, I can say on data ready, and we'll say init user profile. And so down here, this is now init user profile. And so details here is going to be the data from that or it might not be, so I'm going to check it a different way, actually, just because I don't know offhand. So, and am I binding?
One of the arguments, details sender dot.
Oh, and well, this is. Oh, this isn't even. You know, I don't need any of this anymore. because where I really need to modify this is where I'm reading the user profile information to begin with. So what I really need to do here is just get rid of all this. Save that, and then I'm guessing it's Songroom controller where I start reading and caring about the user.
Can we make the code a little bigger?
Let's see. Is that better? All right, so user ref, here we go. So here's my UID and data. And so on this one, I want to say on data ready equals init data, or init user profile. And there's another pull request that I'm about to submit to Firebase Element that'll let you just initialize as an empty object if it's null, but that also hasn't landed yet, so we'll do it this way. Let's find a good place for this. It should be towards the top. Init user profile. So what you're seeing is I'm using the Polymer event binding syntax. So with Polymer, inside a Polymer template, anywhere that you have an element, you can just do on-event name and then bind that to a method on your element. So here I have init user profile, and I have e, and this is user ref. So, and it's bound to user. So here I'm going to say if not. So basically, if user is null, then I'm going to say this dot user equals, and it looked like I had it initializing to room code being blank. So theoretically, I've just fixed that to be a sort of modern way to look at that, or at least modern as of today, as opposed to a month ago. Yes.
On data ready, that's something that's in Firebase Element now, or that's
yeah. So that's not like in a fork of mine or anything. That actually landed. So you can, if you update to the latest version of Firebase Element, and it did only land like over the weekend. So the very latest version. So that means master, not a released version. It'll have this. Sorry, I've been working a whole lot with Firebase lately, as you might be able to tell from how I'm talking. So I'm sort of living in a I know what all the pieces of Firebase Element do. State. Yeah, so now we've refactored that little bit of code, and let's get something running. It might already be running, actually. Nope. Songroom, run, serve. And theoretically, this shouldn't blow up when I log in. What was that? UMWE. We blew this time. Oh, something blew up. I think I did it wrong. Anyway, we can come back to that later. So, yeah, I mean, really, the structure of this talk, I'm really trying to familiarize you with this app, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning. This is open source, and the whole point of this is that if anyone wants to help out or have a real thing to play around with Polymer and experiment with, I want you to help. I figured this could sort of be a meetup community project. I have, there's GitHub issues that need to be done and things like that. So, the point here is to sort of help you understand how Polymer applications are built, also introduce you to the structure of this application so you can pitch in if that's fun. So does anyone have any questions about where we're at? What you want to, is there something that you want to see? How does that work? Or how do I do this? Or I can just keep going through it.
I'm really interested in PVC globals, if you could explain that.
Okay, so let me pull up the docs for that.
Why is it PVC?
So basically, since everything has to have a dash in the name, my sort of catch-all for these are the little utilities that I'm building for Polymer stuff is PVC, because that's polyvinyl chloride, which is a kind of polymer, and so it's just my little.
I knew it had to be something.
I thought it was pipe too. I was like.
Maybe I don't have it. One of the interesting things. What? One of the interesting things is that if you are if you are publishing your Bower components alongside the documentation for all your Polymer elements is going to be live on your website. So, and you can scrub that out.
That's part of that. Automatically does documentation.
Yes. If you're building, which is another video we have about building on the Web Components LA YouTube. Building reusable elements. There's another Yeoman generator called Polymer Seed, and that bootstraps like a reusable element. It has this really nice core component page. So this is just basically parsing comments out of the element definition here. I can show you the actual PVC.
Kind of like JS doc.
Yeah, it's sort of a dialect of JS doc. View source. So here you can see I just have like comments that's like markdown documentation with a few JS doc tags, and and like down here I have some JavaScript comments that define the events and things like that. And then if I'm visiting, if you look at the sourced index.html, all this says is core component page. But what that element does is it loads the source, parses it for documentation, and then renders that out. So this isn't something that you have to like build. This is all done dynamically in the browser. And so then when I go here, I see this. So PVC globals, basically, you drop this in, you can give it a namespace if you want, and then you bind to the values attribute in it, and that's your globals object. So it's like, it has to be an object. You're not trying, like, don't try to bind this to like a string or something like that. But this is an object, and you can then manipulate that object, and that'll be reflected across all instances of PVC globals that you put in your app. And then you can also bind to the on PVC globals update that will tell you like which attribute change, like which property of your globals object changed and what it changed to, so that you can do that as well.
Like exactly through JavaScript, how would you access that value, the PVC globals value inside from another element?
We can demonstrate that right back here at Songroom app. Okay, so here I have PVC globals values equals globals. And so one of the things that I can do with that is in other elements, if I wanted to, like let's say that for some reason I had a URL that was based on a global. I could say, globals.fancy URL or something like that. So you can use it, like you can, without doing any JavaScript, you can bind it like that to other places in your markup. But if you want to do it, because I said values equals globals, here I'm just saying the globals property on my element that I'm defining, which is Songroom app, is going to be like the PVC globals value. So anywhere in here, I can just say this.globals, and that's my globals. Or if I called it something else, it would be that. The other thing that Polymer lets you do is anything that has an ID, well, caveat being anything that has an ID and renders the very first time the template is stamped. So if you're doing like nested if templates and things like that, this doesn't apply to things inside that. But oh, okay. So, well, another important thing to remember here is that anything in your shadow DOM can have an ID, and as long as that ID is unique to your shadow DOM, you don't have to worry about like multiple ID collisions and things like that. So everything you've ever learned about never use IDs because like you'll just end up colliding or something, you can actually start using them again with shadow DOM because you have a very limited scope of data and you know exactly what you're looking at. So here I have Firebase login ID auth. And then you see, or actually, where's that toast? Paper toast. Okay, so I have paper toast ID toast. And so anywhere in my JavaScript down here, there's a convenience method that Polymer gives you. There's a convenient object that's just $, and that's populated with all of your ID'd elements, so long as those elements were rendered the first time it initialized and rendered the template. So anything that shows up after initialization isn't going to be there. But in this case, I can say this.$toast, or if I gave an ID to the PVC globals and I called this, globals L, then I could say this.$PVC global or .globals L dot values, and so now that's my globals values instead of the globals variable. Actually, it's both. It's in both places, but yeah. So that's different ways to access the stuff that you're doing up here from JavaScript down below.
I just realized that my question earlier about the curly braces, it's actually because that's the Polymer syntax.
Yes.
It's not Firebase. I thought that was Firebase.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah. So the curly braces that you're seeing all across here, that is the Polymer template binding syntax. So basically, by wrapping this globals in curly braces, I'm saying rather than just being the string globals, I want to like have this be the variable globals. And it's two-way binding. So if I bind something to an element, that element now can change it. And also when like I change it, that element has those updates. So it's
now
two-way.
It's weird with like handlebars and like template parsing stuff, like because they use the same syntax.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of people using the mustache syntax is pretty common now.
Remember, I think they're all used. So
Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, that like if you're really used to using a different templating language, you might like make some mistakes because Polymer is actually a lot more expressive than handlebars. It's not so you can actually do a lot more. You can do like condition, like it's not just like an object that's bound and then you have a very limited set of helpers. I could do like, globals plus 10 over 5 or false or whatever. Like there's a whole expression syntax that you can use.
What did that mean? That last, sorry, what would that have meant if you?
Oh, that would have, I don't know, blown up or something. I was just giving you an example of some of like it supports addition.
Angular, it's a lot like Angular, how you can do expressions inside your curly braces.
Yeah, so
I understood the point you're trying to make. I didn't
yeah, I was just saying that it's not like if you're with handlebars, you basically either do like reference a variable directly, or you have like a couple helpers that you can use.
But I have to use both at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, what's going to happen in my page? Like,
So interoperability between like
I would.
I mean, you probably wouldn't want to use the Polymer template binding syntax if you also wanted to use handlebar. Like you wouldn't want to use them at the same time. You might use them in different elements. Like you might have one element that you render its shadow DOM using handlebars because that makes sense for that element, or another one that you render its shadow DOM using Polymer. But using them both, like I just don't even like.
All right.
I think that would probably go badly.
I've been asked to do some weird stuff.
some of the I don't know enough about Polymer or handlebars to know if this is the case, but some of them will let you override what the syntax is. So I think like Django, for example, you could change it from whatever it is, the del braces to something else. So other ones, it might be possible for you to override it, so you can set your own syntax.
Yeah.
Call it double brackets to double braces for one of them.
I mean, I prefer to just use Polymer, but I have to build like stuff like this inside of Angular, inside of Ember.
So
I'm gonna get conflicts.
yeah, like if you're going that route, like I mean, it sounds like if you're at that route, it sounds like the things that you're using Polymer for are probably pretty like small scoped things, and so I'd say like once you get into Polymer, like that's the world, like live in that world, but like outside that you don't have to worry about it. So like if I use Polymer template binding in the shadow DOM for an element, and then outside the shadow DOM I'm like rendering elements with handlebars and stuff like that, that's fine because the shadow DOM gives you that sandboxed world, just so long as you're not like trying to have a handlebars template that's also rendering the Polymer binding syntax at the same time. I think you'll be okay. All right, so
I had a question. I was under the impression that the binding that's done by Polymer is part of. They're using an object.observe shim for that?
Yeah, so they're using object.observe, like it's using object.observe. It's also using this node binding thing that and mutation filters, which observes changes to the DOM. So like under the hoods, it's using like next level standards to do the same sort of stuff that Angular is doing today. And like in Chrome, which now ships object.observe natively, that means it's super fast. Like all of those like templating expressions and everything evaluate super fast because you don't have this like big JavaScript notification chain that has to be executed every time anything changes because object.observe just handles that natively. But there is a polyfill shim, I'm not sure which it is because I don't know if it's feature complete, that it includes to do that in browsers that haven't shipped that yet.
And that's pushed back to ES7.
Yeah, that's in ES7 now. Although I'm guessing every browser is going to get that like sooner than they're going to get half of ES6, so it doesn't even matter. Okay, so let's see what else. What's interesting in here? So let's look at the queue. So here is my Songroom controller, and that is controlling. This is the element that's giving you all of this. So let's sort of go through. You can see here that I have at the top. I have if there's a current track. So basically, if there is a track that is marked as the current track from the queue, that's going to render this playback interface here. And so we have a few core icons. Those are bound to various events. So on tap is something that Polymer gives you that is basically like a fast click. So if you're on mobile, that'll execute immediately when they tap instead of waiting the 200 milliseconds or whatever it is for an on-click.
Yes, replaces fastclick.js.
Yeah. When you're using Polymer, like generally use on tap if you're ever going to have anyone on mobile using it. And then one of the other really interesting things, I feel like I'm going to keep saying we have a video for this because we've covered, but Polymer layout elements is another thing built into Polymer that you'll get really addicted to. Basically, it gives you declarative attributes that assign Flexbox CSS to elements. So here I say horizontal layout center, and that's basically saying I want a horizontal, a row-based Flexbox layout. I want it, layout is saying that I want it to be Flexbox, and then center is saying like I want to center the elements along the vertical axis that are inside of this. Down here I have another, like you can nest these. If you say div flex, that's basically applying flex 1 to your element, so that'll be the one that stretches to fill the space. And like if you learn this layout syntax, you can create really complex layouts without writing a single line of CSS, which if you love CSS, I don't know, maybe you won't like, but if you get frustrated by CSS, at least its verbosity at doing certain simple things, then you're going to really love the layout attributes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is sort of like Bootstrap in that way, except rather than using class names, it's using these declarative attributes. Yeah.
Are there any limits on the kind of attributes you can add to the custom elements, or like native attributes already?
It warns you. If you try to use like a title attribute, it'll tell you don't do it.
Yeah, it'll warn you.
What about things like disable and require stuff like
Yeah,
that?
you can use those.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the things that you can do is you can extend an element with another element. So if you're doing something that's like an input, you can make by adding extends equals and then a native element, you can basically say, I want this to inherit all the behavior of this native element, and then I'm going to decorate on top of that. So you can actually make use of the native disabled and all of that, and then just add new functionality that does whatever your special version of that is. And then the way that you use those, so if I had a Songroom input, let's say, that extends input, then I would say input is Songroom input. And that's all I have to do. And now this is going to initialize and run all the lifecycle callbacks for my custom element in it, like on top of the native functionality that's already there. So that's a cool thing.
You can run into any like conflicts with the shadow DOM of native elements?
No, because as soon as you initialize like native elements, as soon as you initialize a shadow root for your custom element, it blows away any like native shadow DOM that was already there. So you're basically like, if you declare a shadow root, you're saying like, I am taking control of the shadow DOM for this. You don't need to do anything. So yeah, we have like the template for this. Then we have the paper tabs. So core animated pages is something that's really powerful and I don't entirely understand yet. But basically, it is a container that allows you to animate between states. And if you've seen the Polymer Topeka app, they have fantastic examples of this. It allows you to do pretty complex things. So once this loads, June, Michael, B. So I click and you see like all these things slide in. If I click on this, it like slides down like that. Other things if I click on, like it grows to fill the screen. Like all of this stuff is enabled by core animated pages, and I have no idea how to tell you to do it because it's a little bit complicated. But I have figured out enough to be able to say, I want, let's just go back to the production. I want to slide between two different things. And the way that you do that, hey, it actually saved it, good. The way that you do that is, so yay, a nice little sliding effect. And that was accomplished by having core animated pages, having the transitions slide from right, importing that transition up here. So I import core animated pages, and then I import the transition. And then basically I have my paper tab. I have my paper tabs down here say selected equals tab, and value attribute is name. So it's saying whenever I click on one of these things, I want to update what's selected to the tab property, and I want to update that from the name attribute. So here I have name tab browse, name tab queue. Core animated pages speak sort of the same language where they have selected tab, and so when the tab changes here, it propagates down here, which allows core animated pages to say, okay, I'm going from this one to this one, and I have this slide from right transition declared, so I'm going to make one slide into the other. So like this is pretty easy if you're just doing this. But if you're doing those more complex transitions like I just showed you on that quiz app, where you have like an element grow to fit the screen and then a certain element like moves to another place and all those sorts of things, that I haven't figured out exactly how to do yet, but I'm going to eventually.
So by you putting them on the top level of core animated pages, so that means anything within that div from the beginning to the end, those are going to all have the same transition.
Yes, but you can declare multiple transitions, and you can make the transitions dynamic as well. There's hooks into that.
Okay.
So let me pull up the docs real quick because I'm not as familiar with these.
There's what to that? Was the last thing you said?
So there's more that you can do with this. Let's take a quick look. So here, like here's a hero transition that they're demoing. So if you have hero transition, and then you have a hero ID on one of the sub-elements, like I think the children of core animated pages have to be sections, and that's like your overall pages. And then within that, they have this hero ID, and basically that's saying this element in this section becomes this element in this section. And so it does some kind of calculation to automatically like move and translate and transform and do things so that like those like are in the same place. So if it's like an image and it like grows to fill the whole screen, then it's gonna like do that. And like I don't know how it works.
So you
but
can actually use it in two different layout structures, but it's the same element.
Yeah.
All the children get transferred.
Yeah, so and like the way that it like it would I don't know exactly what it does. So like I can't speak to like how that works because I haven't like dug that deep under the covers of this one yet, but it's really powerful. I just don't know how to work it yet. And yeah, here's an example of like doing a more dynamic thing where it's saying depending on what we're doing, like depending on which one is selected, we're going to have a different hero, like we're going to have a different element be the hero. So like anything, like a lot of this is programmable and you can change it on the fly, but the simplest possible way to implement it is just saying I want this transition and I have multiple sections and it just slides between them or whatever. So one thing that I think is worth talking about when you're building Polymer apps, basically you can think of like there's a real like refactor pattern that sort of emerges where you're going to create a custom element and you're going to start building in that custom element, and then eventually you're going to be like there's too much stuff going on in this element, and like it's really natural and really easy to be able to just then say, all right, well I'm going to abstract this out into its own element. So in this case, like I had a lot going on here. I had like the layout of the entire page. I have this, like this should probably be its own element. Like it's big enough. It's like a chunk of independent like functionality. The like play controls, I could probably, you know, switch this out into something that's like play controls and then track equals current track and get a lot of the same and like, you know, just encapsulate better. So like don't fight that pattern. That's actually really great. Like you're going to sort of naturally feel the pain of like, I'm doing too much in one element. This is getting too complicated. And then like, it's really easy to refactor out. You just make a new file for your element using the element generators or just manually. You know, you pass the data that you're actually using and you leave everything else out. So that doesn't inherit everything from the top. It just inherits the attributes that it actually needs to function. So in this case, I abstracted out the queue and the listings for the songs into their own elements. So if we look at song listing, this is actually, so here we have a core list. So I'm not even abstracting out the entire list of songs because core list basically did everything that I needed for that particular use case. Instead, I'm just abstracting out the actual listing itself. So in the app, the rendering and the event handling for like each of these items is its own element. And so if we go look at that, song listing, it's very simple. All it does is like put some HTML in. It has its own styles, but like this is a nice, you know, encapsulated piece of functionality. And you're going to find that you do that over and over, and like it sort of comes together naturally because, like I said, you're going to feel that pain, and then you're going to work on it. Wow, it's already almost 9. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like this has been very like free flowing. I hope it's been helpful to some degree. Like I said, I really want this to be a community project, both because I want to see stuff get done on it and I don't have time to do everything I want to do, and because I think it's kind of, it can be really helpful if you want to learn and do technology to have something real to do with it instead of just like, well, I guess I can play around, but I don't really have anything that needs doing.
So what would they have to do to help out?
So let's get that. Let's, oh, my.
And then also, is there a testing framework?
There is. I don't know much about it. So there, like, it's fairly recent. I think about a month and a half ago, they wrote some testing. Like, if you do the Yeoman generator with the seed element, like the distributable elements, that bootstraps with a test folder that has some test stuff in it.
Web component tester.
Yeah, web component tester.
Mocha, Chai, and Sin, I think. I just got testing working with Karma, and it was very nice.
So not a ringing endorsement yet, but I know that they're working on the tools.
I was using Karma. And
yeah.
They specifically said they couldn't use Karma, so they created their own tool instead of using Karma. So that's web component testers, like their own version of Karma for testing web components.
The web component tester NPM?
It is an NPM, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, I want everybody to work on this. Here's the GitHub URL. It'll also be, I'll post this deck and everything after the meetup, and the video will be up as well. Basically, what I need to do before I think it'll be super easy for people to just jump in, I need to come up with sort of a default song library using public domain songs so that I'm not going to get like in trouble for just sharing a giant song library with everyone. And I also need to make it so that you can customize the Firebase so that it's not all just pointing at the same production Firebase. Like, neither of those are very hard. I'll try to get them done in the next day or two, and then it'll be easy to jump in, like just create, like sign up for Firebase, create your own like sandbox Firebase for your own personal testing. And then there's already some issues on GitHub issues. Like, if any of that sounds interesting to implement, grab it. If there's something cool that you just want to see, like, I don't know, it's a collaborative thing. I'm happy to, like, any and all help is welcome. At first, I'd like to manage it with pull requests. So if you have new code you want to ship, like, just send it as a pull request. Not that I'm not willing to open up commit bits, but like, I think it'll probably be more helpful and instructive anyway if we can talk about the code and everything like that on a pull request versus it just going straight into the repository. So yeah, but I hope that this was somewhat informative. I hope that you all will participate in building this together, and I think we could make a really cool karaoke app. So thanks. And if anybody wants